With the conference championship games finally being wrapped up this week, we know who our Super Bowl contendants are going to be. So for the next 2 weeks, all we're going to hear about is how great Andy Reid is and how terrible the Philadelphia Eagles are. Think of it as Andrew Tate versus Greta Thunberg, but in NFL form. Frankly, I hope both teams somehow figure out a way to lose the game. Can't stand either one of them. Don't like Patrick Mahomes. Glad Andy Reid got a Super Bowl a few years ago. He needs to go about his merry way. Philadelphia is gross. I don't like Jalen Hurts. Nick Sirianni seems greasy. And frankly, if we had a defense that could somehow shut the run down the first half of the season, the Detroit Lions probably would have came out of that game with a W. So for the next 2 weeks, the national news media is going to be suckling at the toes of Patrick Mahomes like he's the second coming of Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama all simultaneously wrapped up into one. I want to talk about the Detroit Lions. There's not much to talk about, so let's look at the draft. The NFL draft order is all but set in stone. Some of us have known for a couple of weeks where we were going to pick, but hey, you know what? We didn't make the playoffs. That's what happens with a non-playoff team. With the Matthew Stafford trade still showing massive gains for the Detroit Lions, both with Jared Goff proving that he can be a franchise quarterback and taking the 32nd pick last year that we got from the Rams, packaging it to the Minnesota Vikings to move up 20 spots to the 12th pick to take Jameson Williams, who, in his rookie campaign, despite being limited in his productivity from the torn ACL that he suffered in his final season at Alabama, he still showed flashes of elite level performance. Next year will be a big year for him, having a full off season to really rehab, recoup, and be fully immersed in the Detroit Lions offense. Ideally, we don't draft a quarterback, and Jared Goff and Jameson Williams can build on the chemistry that they had kind of shown later on in the season, but that you already see with Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm hoping that J-Mo can take that exact same leap forward that Amon-Ra St. Brown did between his freshman and sophomore year. With all that being said, the question then needs to be, what should the Lions do with that 6th overall pick that we got from the Rams in that package deal this year? Also, hey guys, shout out to ASB and Penei Sewell for making it to the Pro Bowl for whatever that's worth. I think it's pretty cool. Now, where's Jared Goff's invitation?
Welcome to Detroit.
Alright, hey guys, as you know, I'm Hat and Beard, the host of this channel, and I spent all weekend watching Battleship documentary. Before we get too far down the line, go ahead and do me a favor. Go ahead and click like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you never miss out on any future notifications. And now you can become part of the Hat and Beard gang. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what the Lions need to do with that 6th overall pick. Alright fellas, I know that it's super early on in the offseason to be talking about draft and whatnot, and there's still the combine to happen. There's still the final setting of the last 2 picks, who's going to be 31 and 32. But I want to talk early on already about what we need to do with the 6th pick. And this is all subject to change post-combine, post-pro workouts. You know, things could change. You could have a lot of players pop off with psych evals. You know, you could have players drop down because they don't like how the interactions go with team scouts. But I've laid out for us 3 simple scenarios that we can start to look to build around and project what I think could be the 3 biggest scenarios for us to utilize that 6th overall pick. Let's get into them. The first option, sit and wait. Yep, sit and wait. Don't be aggressive, just be passive. Let the first 5 picks shake out, land where they may. Ideally, in the first 5 picks, you're going to see a combination of Bryce Young and or CJ Stroud and Will Levis go. If that happens and either of those guys are gone, look to see an aggressive team like, say, Las Vegas or even Tennessee look to potentially trade up with the Lions to get quarterback hungry and go after whichever one of the 2, i.e. Stroud or Levis, has fallen out of the top 5. The reason I'm hyped about that is, number 1, Brad Holmes is really good at draft capital. Number 2, if Jalen Carter and Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson are all somehow gone by then, you're going to want to trade out. There's no one really there that justifies a top 10 pick. I am still too hungover from the Jeff Brokuda at 3 a few years back. I know there's a different era, and I know Jeff Brokuda has been hurt, but I'm still too hungover from that to justifiably risk taking a corner in the top 10 picks. I don't like it necessarily, and I feel like the dominant defensive players, the Will Andersons, the Jalen Carters, the Tyree Wilsons, are going to be kind of gone early on. So you're going to want to basically look to trade out. And if that does happen, I think a team like Tennessee, who, you know, doesn't have a quarterback. Remember how you guys all wanted us to take Malik Willis at 2? Yeah. How's that working out for Tennessee? But theoretically, trade out of the top 10. Get yourself a couple extra picks. Get yourself more draft capital, because we know Brad Holmes is really good at drafting players. Or if you don't trade out of that situation and you want to stay at 6, You hope and you pray that somebody doesn't take Will Anderson and that somehow he slides down to 6, or Tyree Wilson. I wouldn't mind taking Tyree Wilson at 6 because he's a physical phenom. I mean, the man passes all of the eye checks. I really like him. He's shooting up draft boards. He's the big D end out of Texas Tech. And theoretically, if it shakes out 1 through 5 with 2 quarterbacks going in the top 5, you're looking at one of those two, Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson, potentially sliding to 6. And in that case, if he's your guy, pull the trigger. If not, make some deals, work out, because you know that the Raiders and the Titans and the Jets and the Panthers and the Commanders are all in need of a quarterback. And they could get a little antsy in their pantsy. I'm looking at you, Las Vegas, getting a little antsy in your pantsy, especially if we put out a lot of smoke signals like we did last year. Everybody kind of thought that we were going to be taking Malik Willis. There was argument that we were going to take Malik Willis at 2 instead of Aiden Hutchinson because of all the PR and all the smoke signals that the Lions organization was able to put out. Potentially, we can do that again. Accrue some draft capital by trading back 5, 6. I'd go as far as even go trade out to number 13, but trade back in the draft, get out of the top 10, get potentially a future first-round pick next year, because with the draft being in Detroit next year, it's going to be pretty awesome to have 2 first-round picks then. But that's a possibility that I don't know if that's really going to happen. Again, we need to wait for all this to shake out. Number 2, Jalen Carter falls out of the top 2. This isn't an overly deep draft for hyper-talented defensive line players outside of your top 2 or 3 players at their position. Jalen Carter, though, coming from Georgia in the SEC, winning 2 national titles, coming in at 6'3", 300 friggin' pounds. The dude's a savage. You haven't seen a dominant force in the middle like this in a very long time. Now, is there a possibility of him to drop out of the top 2? Highly unlikely. If the Bears were smart, the Bears were going to draft Jalen Carter at the first overall pick, or they'll trade back to number 2, let the Houston Texans dump a bunch of picks at him. But either way, Jalen Carter should end up a Chicago Bear if the Bears were smart. That is the big crucial point, though. Are the Bears smart? We haven't necessarily seen the Bears organization make smart decisions the past few years in both personnel packages and drafting players. However, a player like Jalen Carter is just like the Detroit Lions. You could set a foundation with a superstar defensive line player who can be there for 5, 6, 10 years potentially. You know, really cause a lot of disrupt and havoc. You've seen what Aiden Hutchinson was able to do for the Lions this year, both on the field and off the field. Can Jalen Carter be that same type of person for the Chicago Bears? Probably. Will the Chicago Bears draft him? Probably. However, if the Chicago Bears don't draft Jalen Carter and they decide to go with, like, say, a Will Anderson at 2 or 1, depending on where they decide to land in the draft, if they want to trade out of the number 1 overall pick, if Houston is really that high on, say, Bryce Young, that they really want to trade up and solidify that number 1 overall pick, because, you know, there are a lot of other teams that want quarterbacks too that are going to be offering deals to the Bears to move up, because the Bears have Justin Fields. There's no need for him to take a quarterback with their first overall pick. But in the situation that the Bears don't end up taking Jalen Carter in the top 2 picks, or he falls out of the top 2 picks if it's not Chicago by some weird situation, if Jalen Carter is still available at 3, is it worth the Lions organization to offer up draft capital that we know Brad Holmes can utilize later on in the draft? Look at James Houston, Kirby Joseph, Malcolm Rodriguez, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all these later round picks that he's been able to find out of relative obscurity and turn into budding superstars in the league. Is it worth auctioning off the house for Jalen Carter? Drop a comment down below. What do you think? If Jalen Carter drops out of the top 2, should the Lions auction off the house to move up to 3 to take Jalen Carter with a 3rd overall pick? Or should we just let the chips fall where they may, see where he falls? Because if Jalen Carter falls out of the top 2, you're looking at possibly then a real big shakeup. You see a lot of maneuvers going on. You know, do the Seahawks re-sign Geno Smith? Because if the Seahawks re-sign Geno Smith, then they're not going to be quarterback hungry. Then they're going to go after, you know, a Tyree Wilson, a Will Anderson, a Jalen Carter potentially, because the Seattle Seahawks are a good team. They're a playoff team. Their defense needs a little bit of retoolage, and where they sit in the draft with all the capital that they have, much like the Lions, they're poised in a good position to execute good draft picks and bring in talent to elevate their defense. So if you look at the way the first round is going to be shaken out, we're going to be competing with the Seattle Seahawks probably for the same players on the board. Our systems aren't exactly the same. However, the talent that we're looking at is about the same players, a 1-for-1, if you're looking at the same type of board that I'm looking at. And the third option, which is my favorite option of it all, look, you're probably going to see Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, and Tyree Wilson all gone in the first 5 picks, okay? And no, I'm sorry, Colin Cowherd. I'm not going to take an undersized Bryce Young to sit on the bench, to pressure Jared Goff, to have the fan base yapping about our first round quarterback. We got to get him in there. I know you guys play a lot of Madden and you always want to take a quarterback in the first round, especially a mobile quarterback who can get out of the pocket and make plays. But Jared Goff is the answer. So let's stop talking about Bryce Young in the first round for the Lions. Let's stop talking about a first round quarterback. I've already addressed that in my previous video, why that's stupid and why you're stupid for thinking that. So you're going to be looking at a situation where the quarterback hungry teams are going to be wanting to trade up to get one of the big three, we'll say. Will Levis, CJ Stroud, and Bryce Young. You're going to be fielding some calls. Take it. Take them. Take all the picks. There's no reason to pull the trigger on a iffy guy in the top 10. Trade out of the top 10, allocate draft picks, get more picks, more capital. Let Brad Holmes do his thing. Trade out of the top 10, trade back to 11, trade back to 13, go as far as even taking a bunch of picks from the Commanders this year, next year, a couple of thirds, maybe even a fourth. Really package up a hell of a deal with the Commanders if you want to slide all the way back to the 16th spot. Trading out of the top 10 makes me feel a lot more comfortable about taking a defensive back in the first round. It's probably going to be one of our picks regardless. But when you trade out of the top 10, you don't have as much pressure. Plus, you're also allocating more draft capital, which brings a lot of combinations that Brad Holmes can bring in. We know he likes to double up on positions. I'm not necessarily saying this is going to be the draft that he doubles up on DBs, because we're probably going to look to bring in a free agent corner. Jalen Ramsey, probably not. A Darius Slay. I'd love to see Darius Slay. Probably going to be Bradbury. We can afford Bradbury. He kind of fits our system. He's a little bit of a journeyman, a little bit of more of a veteran that can really coach up a struggling Jeff Brokuda and a potential, you guys know I'm high on Joey Porter Jr. or the kid out of Illinois, or even like a Kelly Ringo, somebody like that who can come in and bolster our defensive backfield. But we also know that when we trade out of that pick, we're kind of offering up more mobility. So you can look at, instead of going DB, DN, DB linebacker, you could even look at, like, say, a Joey Porter. You could reach up and take like a Joey Porter Jr. at 13, and I wouldn't necessarily feel that bad about it because I like what I see on the tape from Joey Porter Jr. And then at 18, you could take a flyer on a guy like Osiris Torrance. Yeah, Osiris Torrance. You haven't heard me say his name at all, but we're going to need to replace the guard position, and Osiris Torrance fits that guard position role for the Detroit Lions. He can basically be a one-to-one swap with size-wise with a Halapalooty Vaitai. He's also a little bit more mobile than Big V and plays more like Evan Brown. Look, if you want to take a guard in the first round, I think Osiris Torrance might be the guy. Do I want to take a guard in the first round? Not necessarily. I'm not too high on taking interior offensive lineman with a first round pick. However, Frank Ragnow, you see how well that worked out. Dude's probably one of the top two centers in the entire league behind Jason Kelsey. But bringing in Osiris Torrance really helps bolster our offensive line and keeps continuing to play along with the young developing. It bolsters it. It moves us. You don't lose anything. You don't lose anything by bringing in a Torrance like that. You, if anything, maybe even bump up the offensive line a little bit depending on how well he transitions to the NFL. You'd sit him next to a Frank Ragnow and a Penei Sewell, or a Frank Ragnow and a Taylor Decker, and he's immediately going to be able to not have a lot of pressure on him, but be able to contribute with those superstar outside line players and interior offensive line players. So let me know what you guys think down below what we should do. Who should we draft? Who would you draft? What would you do with the 6th overall pick? I've given us 3 examples on what we could do. I'm not saying that's going to happen, and all of this is subject to change pending pro days, pending combines, pending maybe somebody gets arrested. You never know. Shit like that happens, but just remember that Jalen Carter punches puppies and spits in old people's faces. I'm just kidding, Jalen Carter. I just want you to fall to the Lions. I just want you to be a Detroit Lion, man. I want you to somehow slip out of the top 5, and we can take you at 6. I really want to put you next to a Lee McNeil. I really want you on our front 7, man. I think you're the answer, dude. Just come to Detroit, man. Just please come to Detroit, Jalen Carter. Please, just come to Detroit. As always, guys, have yourself a banging rest of the week. I've been Hat and Beard. You've been an attentive audience. Now get out of here.
Time to 23 Skidoo. Or should I say 69 Skidoo.
She said that my pornos were boring.